Chapter 11, A Place Among Them. An unexpected invitation. Ethan sat at a corner table in the guild hall, still trying to process everything that had happened. The dungeon, the battle, his new class. Shadowcaster. He had walked into Nightshade Caverns as a porter. Now, he was a recognized adventurer. But that didn't change one fact. He was alone. Until Gareth walked up to him. "We're getting a drink. You coming or not?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard. Kara and Leah were already settled at a nearby table, a couple of drinks in hand. He hesitated. Kara rolled her eyes. "Oh, for the love of—" "Just sit down already." Leah smiled. "You earned it." Ethan slowly stood and walked over, unsure what to expect. And just like that, he wasn't sitting alone anymore. The offer to stay Gareth took a long drink before setting his mug down. "So, you did good back there." Ethan nearly choked on his drink. Kara snorted. "Is that the closest thing to a compliment you can give?" Gareth ignored her. "Point is," he continued, looking directly at Ethan, "we could use another blade in the group." Ethan stilled. Was he saying what he thought he was? Leah nodded. "You handled yourself well, and after that nightmare of a dungeon, we'd rather not go back to three-man jobs for a while." Kara sighed dramatically. "It's not like we're saying we like you or anything." Ethan smirked. "Of course not." But beneath her words, he could tell she wasn't against the idea either. Gareth leaned back in his chair. "So, you in?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I'm in." And for the first time since this all began, he felt like he belonged. A few days off. With the job officially completed, the party agreed to take a few days off before picking up another assignment. Leah had mana exhaustion from excessive spell use. Kara needed to repair her sword. Gareth wanted to line up a worthwhile contract. Ethan, he needed to figure out his next steps. "Take a breather," Gareth said. "We'll reach out when we line up the next job." Ethan nodded. After everything they'd been through, a break was well deserved. A currency lesson, Ethan stayed behind in the guild hall after the others left, heading toward the reception counter. Elias Thurman was still there, flipping through a stack of reports. Ethan hesitated, then cleared his throat. Elias didn't even look up. "What is it?" "I have a question." Finally, Elias glanced up. "Go on." Ethan took out one of the gold coins he had received from the dungeon. "I'm still new to this. Can you explain the currency system? How much is this actually worth?" Elias sighed but set his papers aside. He gestured to a metal chart on the counter that listed currency conversions. Currency breakdown: 100 copper equals 1 silver. 10 silver equals 1 gold. 100 gold equals 1 platinum. Ethan frowned. "And in real money?" Elias smirked slightly, comparing it to pre-system currency. Ethan nodded. Elias tapped the chart. 1 copper equals $0.10, 10 cents USD. 1 silver equals 10 USD. 1 gold equals 100 USD. 1 platinum equals 10,000 USD. Ethan's eyes widened. "So, my 75 gold is worth about $7,500. Ethan nearly choked. His first job had paid him more than 3 months of working in the old world. Elias chuckled. "Welcome to adventuring, kid." Chapter 12. Foundations of the Future. A new direction. The streets of Portland were alive with activity as Ethan left the Adventurers Guild. Even though it was still early, the city was bustling. Merchants calling out their wares, street performers gathering small crowds, adventurers heading toward the guild to pick up contracts. It wasn't the world he had grown up in, but it was the world now. And for the first time since the system's arrival, Ethan didn't feel like he was on the outside looking in. He had a party, he had a class, he had a path forward. But there was still one problem. He wasn't strong enough. Not yet. The weight of the unknown Ethan made his way down one of the side streets, hands in his pockets as he processed everything. There was a thrill in knowing he had leveled up, that he had his own class and real abilities now. But with that came questions. Why had the system delayed his awakening for so long? Why had his SSS-rank skill stayed hidden during the rank assessment? And what the hell was the nightshade essence he had received from the dungeon boss? He pulled the small obsidian vial from his pouch, holding it up to the light. The liquid inside was thick, almost like ink, swirling in slow, unnatural patterns. There was no system description when he focused on it. No explanation. Just a single line. An essence steeped in shadow. It calls to those who dwell in the dark. Ethan frowned. That didn't sound ominous at all. But before he could dwell on it further, a loud shouting match nearby pulled him from his thoughts. A glimpse into adventuring culture. Down one of the market streets, two adventurers were yelling at each other. A larger man, built like a brawler, was red-faced, towering over a leaner rogue type. Ethan caught only bits of the argument. "Your fault we lost the contract. Maybe if you weren't so slow, I wouldn't have had to cut and run." The larger man shoved the rogue, nearly knocking him off his feet. A few bystanders backed away, but nobody interfered, not even the city guards standing nearby. Ethan narrowed his eyes. This wasn't the old world. Adventurers operated under different rules. Reputation, strength, and personal grudges meant everything. If you couldn't defend yourself, you had no business being out here. The fight didn't last long. The larger adventurer swung first, but the rogue ducked under the strike and retaliated, his fist colliding hard with the man's gut. The bigger man stumbled back, cursing, but didn't press the fight. Instead, he spat on the ground. "This isn't over." The rogue only smirked. Ethan shook his head and kept walking. The world had changed, and the rules were still being written. Gearing up. His first priority was getting better gear. The dagger Gareth had given him was functional, but barely. And if he was going to be an assassin-mage hybrid, he needed something better suited for his fighting style. He found a small but well-kept smithy tucked into a quieter district of the city. A wooden sign hung above the entrance. Hollow Fang Forge, weapons and armor for professionals. Stepping inside, the scent of burning metal and oil filled the air. Weapons lined the walls, daggers, swords, spears, even enchanted throwing knives. A hulking man with a scarred face looked up from behind the counter. "You buying or wasting my time?" he grunted. Ethan met his gaze. "Depends on the price." The man grunted in approval. "Then you've got my attention." Choosing the right weapon. Ethan scanned the weapons, searching for something that fit his new class. He needed something fast, precise, deadly. A massive broadsword, too slow. A set of throwing knives. Useful, but not enough stopping power. Then he saw them, a pair of twin daggers displayed on a deep violet cloth. The black steel blades had a faint shimmer of purple, almost as if they were absorbing light rather than reflecting it. They weren't just normal weapons. They were enchanted. Shadow Fang daggers, uncommon, forged using shadow-infused steel. Grants plus 5% bonus damage in darkness, slightly reduces enemy perception of the user when in low-light environments. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. These were perfect. How much? The smith gave him a long look. 450 gold. Ethan nearly choked. That was over $45,000 in old world money. His entire dungeon payout had been 75 gold. "I don't have that," the smith snorted. "No shit, you're a fresh adventurer." Ethan sighed, setting the daggers back down. For now, he'd have to make do with his current weapon. But one day, he was coming back for them. A reminder of what's at stake. As he left the shop, his mind drifted back to his sister, Emma. The nightmares hadn't stopped. Even after leveling up, even after getting stronger, her screams still haunted him. He clenched his fists. He wasn't doing this just for gold. He wasn't doing this just to survive. He had a goal. A mission. And no matter how long it took, he was going to find out what happened to her. Even if he had to tear through the system itself to do it. Chapter 13. The first solo mission. A city of opportunity and danger. The morning air was crisp and cool as Ethan wandered through the bustling streets of Portland. The city had changed so much since the arrival of the system. Once, Portland had been a modern metropolis filled with office buildings, cars, and tech startups. Now, it was a city of adventurers. The streets were filled with blacksmiths, potion makers, and mana crystal traders. Taverns had become gathering spots for mercenaries and dungeon raiders. And looming in the distance, just beyond the city walls, were the rift gates, massive structures glowing with eerie energy leading to unknown worlds. For better or worse, this was the new reality. And Ethan had finally taken his first steps into it. An unexpected message. Ethan was on his way back to his inn when a small blue notification window appeared in his vision. System notification. You have received a private request. Sender, Portland Adventurers Guild mission. Rank F request details, speak with Guild Overseer Elias Thurman regarding a job opportunity. Ethan frowned. He wasn't expecting a job so soon, especially not a private request. Most adventurers had to fight for contracts, competing with other parties for the best-paying jobs. So why was the guild contacting him directly? He exhaled sharply and turned back toward the guild hall. Something about this felt off. But if he was going to make a name for himself, he couldn't afford to ignore it. A job offer from Elias the guild hall was just as busy as before, adventurers coming and going as they picked up contracts and reported missions. Ethan made his way to the main reception desk, where Elias Thurman stood reviewing paperwork. The guild overseer barely looked up as Ethan approached. "You got my message," Elias said simply. Ethan nodded. "What's the job?" Elias finally set down his papers and folded his arms. "There's a minor situation that needs handling outside the city." He tapped a map pinned to the counter. "About 6 miles west of here, there's a small supply outpost that regularly delivers materials to the guild. They've been late on their shipments." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And you think something happened?" Elias gave a short nod. "It's probably nothing serious, maybe a few wild beasts. But the guild can't afford delays, so we need someone to check it out." Ethan hesitated. "Why me?" There were plenty of experienced adventurers who could handle something like this. So why was the guild reaching out to a brand new F rank? Elias smirked slightly. "You survived Nightshade Caverns." That was all he said. But Ethan understood. That dungeon should have killed him. The fact that he made it out, not just alive but stronger, meant the guild was watching. Testing him. He clenched his fists. This was his first real job, a chance to prove that he wasn't just lucky. "I'll take it," he said. Preparation and planning. Before setting out, Ethan took stock of his gear and status. His Shadowcaster class was versatile, but he still had a long way to go before he could hold his own against higher-ranked threats. Status screen. Name Ethan Voss. Class Shadowcaster, Hybrid Assassin Mage. Level 10. Health 320 out of 320. Mana 80 Strength 24. Agility 32. Endurance 23. Perception 25. Mana control 10. Available stat points 5. Current skills: Shadow Step, short range dash plus invisibility for 1 second. Silent Blade infuses melee attacks with shadow energy for extra damage. Dark Grasp summons shadow tendrils to restrain enemies. Void Lance launches a piercing bolt of dark energy at enemies. Shadow Cloak, passive, rare. Enhances stealth in low-light environments, reduces enemy perception range. Ethan still needed better weapons, but for now he had to work with what he had. He stopped by a small supply shop, spending 10 gold to stock up on. Rations for travel. Basic healing potions, X2. Whetstone to keep his dagger sharp. His remaining balance was 65 gold. Not great. But if he played this right, this job could be the first step toward real independence. The road to the outpost. The western roads leading out of Portland were worn but well-traveled. Caravans passed by, pulled by strange system-born beasts that had replaced traditional animals. Other adventurers occasionally rode past on mana-powered mounts, heading toward their own assignments. Ethan walked with purpose, keeping an eye on his surroundings. His perception stat had increased thanks to his leveling, and he was starting to notice details he would have missed before. A broken wooden signpost, claw marks embedded in the wood, small tufts of fur caught on nearby bushes. Something had happened here, and the closer he got to the outpost, the more uneasy he felt. Something's not right. By the time Ethan reached the outpost, the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky. The place was silent. Too silent. The small cluster of wooden buildings stood intact, but there were no signs of people, no movement, no supplies stacked outside, even though shipments were supposed to be prepared. He approached cautiously, dagger in hand. Something felt wrong. Chapter 14. Shadows in the Outpost. The silence before the storm. Ethan stood at the edge of the abandoned outpost, his grip tight around his dagger. The place was eerily quiet, too quiet. No signs of workers, no torches burning, no wagons loaded with goods. Just empty buildings, the occasional creak of wood in the breeze, and the lingering scent of something rotten. Then, a system notification flashed across his vision. Danger detected. Threat level unknown. His heartbeat quickened. Something was here, and it was watching him. Examining the outpost, Ethan moved carefully, keeping his footsteps light. The outpost consisted of a main storage house, the largest building where shipments were likely prepared, a small barracks where the workers slept, a blacksmith's workshop likely used for repairing tools and weapons, a stable, empty, the doors slightly ajar, no signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies. But the longer Ethan stayed, the more unnatural the silence felt, like the place itself was holding its breath. And then, a faint sound, a low, wet scratching noise coming from inside the storage house. Something was inside. Waiting. A shadow moves. Ethan crouched low, keeping to the edges of the building. His shadow cloak passive made it easier to move unseen in the dim light. Step by step, he approached the storage house door. The scratching sound grew louder, more frantic, like something was tearing through wood or cloth. Then, a soft click. A floorboard creaked behind him. Ethan froze, then whipped around, just in time to see a dark, twisted shape lunging at him. First strike, he barely had time to react. Shadow step, activated. In an instant, he flashed backward, the creature's claws slashing through empty air. It landed where he had just stood. A grotesque, twisted humanoid figure, its skin blackened like charred flesh. Its eyes burned red, hollow and empty, like embers in a dying fire. And its mouth was too wide, too inhuman. Identifying entity. Unknown classification. Threat level mid-frank, possibly higher. Ethan gritted his teeth. What the hell is this thing? It wasn't like the monsters in the dungeon. It wasn't like the beasts that roamed outside the city. It felt different, familiar somehow. And then it moved, faster than something that size should be able to. A desperate battle. The creature lunged again, its clawed hands reaching for Ethan's throat. He ducked, twisting to the side, then countered with Silent Blade. Silent Blade activated, daggers infused with shadow energy, plus 15% bonus damage. His dagger sliced across the creature's ribs. Dark, tar-like blood splattered onto the dirt. The creature let out a horrible, gurgling snarl, but it didn't slow down. Instead, its body shifted, bones cracking as it moved at an unnatural angle. Then it attacked again. This time faster. It's learning. A losing fight, Ethan dodged left, barely avoiding a clawed swipe. He was faster, but the creature was relentless. It didn't feel pain. It didn't hesitate. And Ethan, he was already tiring. I need to end this fast. Dark grasp. Activated. Shadows erupted from the ground, coiling around the creature's limbs, restraining it. It thrashed violently, snarling, forcing Ethan to act. Void Lance activated. A bolt of dark energy exploded from his palm, hitting the creature square in the chest. The force sent it crashing backward, its body twitching. For a brief moment, Ethan thought it was over. Then the creature stood up. Its wounds were already closing. Ethan's blood ran cold. It's regenerating. More are coming. The air grew thick, heavy, and then a second pair of glowing red eyes appeared from the shadows, then a third, and a fourth. Ethan's breath hitched. The first one had been bad enough. But now, there were more. Too many. He needed to get out of here. Now he activated Shadow Step, retreating toward the edge of the outpost. The creatures didn't chase him immediately. They just stood there, staring, watching, almost as if they were letting him leave, and that terrified him more than anything. A fading whisper, As Ethan reached the edge of the outpost, a new system message appeared. Unknown presence detected. Recording entity signature. Incomplete data. Error. And beneath it, a faint whisper, not from the system, not from his own thoughts, just a single chilling voice in the back of his mind. You are not ready yet. But soon. Ethan's breath caught, and when he turned back toward the outpost, the creatures were gone. Only the silence remained. Chapter 15. Whispers in the Dark. The long walk back. Ethan moved quickly, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the outpost. The further he got, the more his heartbeat slowed, but the uneasy feeling in his chest didn't fade. Something about those creatures was wrong. They weren't just monsters, they felt different. Intelligent. Wrong, and the whisper he had heard, that chilled him more than anything. You are not ready yet. But soon. His hands clenched into fists as he walked. Who or what had spoken those words? And why had the creatures let him leave? What was that thing? Ethan mentally reviewed the fight. The creature had a humanoid shape but wasn't human. Its skin was blackened like burnt flesh. It moved unnaturally, shifting and adapting mid-fight. It had red, glowing eyes. It regenerated. And worst of all, it wasn't alone. A cold shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't like the night fangs in the dungeon. This was something else, something deliberate. And the guild had no idea it existed. Ethan exhaled sharply. They need to know. Reporting to the guild. By the time Ethan reached the guild hall, night had already fallen. The building was still alive with activity, adventurers drinking, laughing, sharing stories of their latest hunts. It felt normal, like there weren't monsters lurking just miles away. Ethan pushed through the noise toward the reception desk, where Elias Thurman was reviewing reports. Elias barely glanced up. "You're back early," he muttered. Ethan slammed his hands on the counter. "I found something." That got Elias's attention. The older man set his papers aside and studied him carefully. "Go on." "The truth about the outpost." Ethan took a deep breath. "There's no one at the outpost," he said. "No bodies, no blood. Just gone." Elias didn't react, just listened. "But that's not the worst part." Ethan leaned in. "There were creatures there," he said in a low voice. "Not beasts, not dungeon monsters. Something else." Elias's expression finally shifted. "Describe them." Ethan did, everything he could remember. The blackened skin, the red eyes, the unnatural movements, the way they regenerated, the way they learned. By the time he finished, Elias was silent. Then he slowly exhaled. "Shit." Something the guild didn't expect. Ethan frowned. "You recognize them?" Elias didn't answer right away, but his silence spoke volumes. Finally he sighed. "I don't know what they are," he admitted, "but I know this much." His gaze hardened. "This isn't the first report." Ethan's breath hitched. "There have been other sightings." Elias nodded, "mostly near rift zones, disappearances, signs of fights, but no bodies." He folded his arms. The guild assumed it was high-level dungeon monsters breaking containment. But if you saw them that far from a rift? He shook his head. "This is worse than we thought." Ethan's stomach twisted. That meant, whatever these things were, they were spreading. And no one had stopped them yet. An unsettling choice. Elias drummed his fingers against the desk. "We need more information," he said finally, "but we can't send just anyone." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You want me to go back?" Elias met his gaze. "You survived," he said. "That means something." Ethan hesitated. Going back alone was a death sentence. But if he went with Gareth and the others, maybe they could find answers. Maybe they could stop this. He exhaled. "Let me talk to my team." Elias nodded. "Do it fast," he said, "because if these things are spreading, we're already running out of time." Chapter 16. A Team's Decision. A heavy truth. Ethan left the guild hall, his mind racing. The encounter at the outpost was worse than he had thought. Not just because of the creatures, but because the guild already knew something was happening. They just didn't know how bad it was. And now, it was his problem. He needed to tell his party, because if he was going back, he wasn't going alone. Finding the team Gareth, Kara and Leah were exactly where Ethan expected them. The Iron Flask Tavern. The place was loud with the sounds of rowdy adventurers, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat and ale. The party sat at a corner table, relaxed for the first time in days. But when Gareth saw Ethan's face, his expression hardened. "You look like someone just told you your sword broke." Ethan slid into the seat next to them. "We have a problem." The conversation turned serious. Kara raised an eyebrow. "That was fast. Didn't we just finish a dungeon?" Ethan took a breath, then told them everything. The empty outpost, the creatures, the way they moved, adapted, regenerated, the way they let him leave. By the time he finished, the tavern noise faded into the background. Kara had gone completely still. Leah's face was pale, and Gareth, his expression was grim. "You're sure about this?" Gareth asked. Ethan nodded. "Elias said the guild has gotten other reports, but no one's actually seen these things, until now." Leah swallowed. "If they're that dangerous, why did they let you go?" Ethan hesitated, then he told them the worst part. "The system recorded an error when I fought them," he said, like it couldn't recognize what they were. Kara sat up straighter. "The system didn't register them?" Ethan shook his head. "Not completely." Then he hesitated. "And I heard something. A voice." Gareth's eyes narrowed. "A voice?" Ethan nodded. "You are not ready yet. But soon." Silence. The weight of those words settled over the table like a storm cloud. Finally, Gareth exhaled. "Shit. A party decision. So let me get this straight," Kara said, leaning back. "The guild wants you to go back. And you're actually considering it?" Ethan met her gaze. "Yes," Kara scoffed. "Are you insane? You barely survived the first time." Leah spoke up, her voice quieter. "But if we don't go, what happens?" Gareth's expression was unreadable, but Ethan could tell he was already thinking ahead, weighing the risks, judging whether this was worth it. Then he sighed. "We're not letting you go alone." Ethan felt a mix of relief and gratitude. "So we're doing this," Kara groaned. "Looks like it." Leah nodded. "If these things are spreading, we need to know what we're dealing with." Gareth folded his arms. "Then we prepare. We're not walking into a trap unarmed." Checking his status, before anything else, Ethan needed to see his growth. He opened his status screen. Name, Ethan Voss. Class, Shadowcaster, Hybrid Assassin Mage. Level, 10 to 11 plus 1. Level from last battle. Health, 320 to 340. Mana, Ozmdesat, Devadesat. Strength, 24 to 25, plus 1 level gain. Agility, 32 to 34, plus 2 level gains. Endurance, 23 to 24, plus 1 level gain. Perception, 25 to 26, plus 1 level gain. Mana Control, 10 to 12 plus 2 level gains. Available stat points, 5. New system log from Predator's Absorption. Random stat absorption. Plus 2 agility, plus 1 endurance. Skill absorption. Roll, failed. No new skills acquired this time. Ethan frowned slightly. His agility boost would help him move faster, but he had hoped for another skill. Still, every stat counted. Preparing for the next mission. Gareth stood. "We need gear," he said. "Better weapons, better supplies." Ethan nodded. He still had his dagger, but if he was going to fight these things again, he needed more. Kara sighed. "Guess I'll get my sword reforged." Leah adjusted her cloak. "I'll stock up on potions." Gareth glanced at Ethan. "We head out at sunrise. Be ready." Ethan exhaled slowly. They were doing this. Chapter 17. Shadows in the Market. Morning preparations. The sun was still rising over Portland, casting long shadows across the city's stone streets as Ethan moved through the bustling marketplace. They were leaving for the outpost at noon, and Gareth had given everyone a simple task: gear up, stock supplies, and meet back at the guild. It felt almost routine. Except it wasn't, because this time they weren't just hunting monsters, they were walking into the unknown, and Ethan wasn't sure they'd all walk back out. A weapon worthy of the hunt. The Hollow Fang Forge was quieter than the rest of the market, its front sign worn but sturdy. Inside, the scent of burning metal filled the air, and a massive, scarred blacksmith was hammering away at a glowing hot blade. Ethan stepped forward. The smith, Boros, glanced up. "Back again?" he grunted. Ethan nodded. "I need something better than this." He set his old dagger on the counter. Boros barely spared it a glance. "That thing's barely worth scrap metal." Ethan exhaled. "I need a real weapon." The blacksmith rubbed his jaw. "You're a shadowcaster, right?" Ethan tensed slightly. "How do you know?" Boros snorted. "You walk quiet, your stance is balanced, and you've got the look of someone who fights better in the dark." He turned and grabbed a case from behind the counter, setting it down with a heavy thud. Inside were a pair of daggers, sleek, black steel, with faint purple runes carved along the blades. Twin shadow fangs, uncommon, forged from shadow-infused steel. Grants plus 5% bonus damage in darkness. Slightly reduces enemy perception of the user when in low-light environments. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. These were perfect. "How much?" he asked. Boros eyed him. 450 gold. Ethan winced. "I have 65. The blacksmith sighed. "Look, kid, you're not walking out of here with those for that price." Ethan gritted his teeth. He needed those daggers. But before he could speak, Boros tapped the counter. "I'll make you a deal." Ethan looked up. "What kind of deal?" Boros smirked. "I've got a job that needs handling. You take care of it, and I'll knock the price down." Ethan hesitated. "What kind of job?" The blacksmith leaned forward. "There's something lurking in the sewers beneath the city, something that's been attacking workers." Ethan frowned. "A monster?" Boros shrugged. "Could be. Or it could be something worse." He folded his arms. "You bring me proof it's dead, I'll cut the price in half." Ethan exhaled, a side job right before heading back to the outpost. But he glanced at the daggers. He needed them, and this was his only chance. "Deal." Boros nodded. "Then I suggest you don't waste time." A descent into darkness. The entrance to the sewers was at the edge of the marketplace, a rusted iron grate leading down into the tunnels. Ethan crouched, gripping the bars. The air was stale and damp. Whatever was down there, it had been lurking for a while. He exhaled, activated Shadow Cloak, and slipped inside. The tunnel walls were lined with stone and old pipes, the sound of dripping water echoing through the darkness. Step by step, he moved deeper. Then he saw it. A trail of blood leading further into the tunnels. Something was waiting for him, and he was about to find out what. Chapter 18. Into the Depths. A deal with the smith. The scent of burning metal and oil still clung to Ethan's clothes as he left Hollow Fang Forge, his mind racing. A monster in the sewers. A side job right before their outpost mission. It was a risk. But if he completed it, he'd get a massive discount on the twin shadow fangs, a pair of daggers tailor-made for his fighting style. And if there was one thing he had learned from Nightshade Caverns, a good weapon could mean the difference between life and death. So now, he was hunting. The sewers of Portland. The sewer entrance was exactly where Boros said it would be, beneath a rusted iron grate, half hidden in an alley at the edge of the market district. Ethan crouched beside it, gripping the bars, the air reeking of stagnant water and something else, something rotting. He exhaled. Then he dropped down. Navigating the tunnels. The moment his boots hit solid stone, the system reacted. New location discovered. Portland sewer system. Dungeon status. Unranked. Non-standard threats detected. Ethan frowned. Non-standard threats? He activated Shadow Cloak, blending into the dim surroundings as he moved forward. The tunnels stretched ahead in 3 directions. Left, a narrow passage with flowing water, its surface murky. Right, a corridor collapsed inward, rubble blocking the path. Forward, a larger tunnel where the blood trail led deeper. Ethan had a choice, but deep down he already knew where he was going. He followed the blood, something watches. The further he went, the more unnatural the silence became. No rats, no dripping water, just his own breathing and the faint squelch of blood beneath his boots. Then, he felt it. The sensation of being watched, a slow, crawling tension at the back of his skull. Ethan didn't stop moving, but his grip on his dagger tightened. It knows I'm here. He reached the end of the passage and saw the first body. The first victim, a guild worker, slumped against the stone wall. Their face was frozen in a look of pure terror, their hands clutching at their torso where something had torn them open. Ethan crouched, his pulse steady. Examining corpse. Cause of death, severe lacerations, organs removed post-mortem. Time of death, 12 to 16 hours ago. Infection risk, low. Ethan's jaw tightened. This wasn't a random kill, something had hunted this person. And worse, it had taken something from them. The first attack. A soft click, a faint splash of water. Ethan moved before his brain even registered it. Shadow step, activated. In an instant he flashed backward, just as a clawed hand ripped through the space he had just occupied. He landed in a low crouch, weapons drawn. And finally he saw it. The sewer stalker. It was partially human, or at least it had been once. Its flesh was twisted and blackened, stretched too tightly over its frame. Its arms were too long, its fingers ending in razor-sharp claws, and its eyes, they were glowing red. The same red eyes he had seen at the outpost. Ethan's blood ran cold. It's one of them. And then it moved. The fight begins. The creature lunged, its speed unnatural. Ethan dodged left, feeling the wind of its claws slashing past his face. Silent blade activated. His dagger flashed, slicing across the creature's ribs. It howled, but it didn't fall. Instead, its wounds sealed instantly. Ethan's stomach dropped. Regeneration, just like the ones from the outpost. This fight just got a lot harder. Adapt or die, Ethan switched tactics. Dark grasp activated. Shadows erupted from the ground, coiling around the creature's limbs. For a brief second it struggled. Then, its form shifted, slipping through the tendrils like liquid. Ethan's eyes widened. It adapted. He needed to end this now. Void Lance activated. A bolt of dark energy shot from his palm, slamming into the creature's chest. The force sent it flying backward, but before Ethan could move, it vanished. The tunnel was empty, like it had never been there. The aftermath. Ethan's chest heaved. The air was thick with tension. Then the system pinged. Threat evasion detected. Enemy has retreated. Warning, unknown entities may learn from failed engagements. Ethan exhaled slowly. It hadn't fled out of fear. It had watched, tested him, and next time, it would be stronger. He glanced back at the dead worker, at the blood-stained floor, at the dark tunnels stretching ahead. Then he turned and walked away. This fight wasn't over. Chapter 19, A Warning Unspoken. The long walk back, Ethan emerged from the sewer tunnels, his boots splattered with filthy water and blood. His heartbeat was steady, but his mind was racing. That thing he fought, it wasn't just a sewer beast, it was one of them. The same kind of creature that had been at the outpost, and that meant this wasn't an isolated event. These creatures were moving, spreading, and no one was stopping them. The Smith's Reward, the streets of Portland were still buzzing with life as Ethan made his way back to Hollow Fang Forge. The familiar scent of molten metal greeted him as he stepped inside. Boros, the scarred blacksmith, looked up from his workbench. Well? Ethan pulled a severed, blackened claw from his pouch and dropped it on the counter. Boros raised an eyebrow. That's not a sewer rat. Ethan exhaled. Number it's not. Boros studied the claw, frowning. Damn thing looks wrong. Ethan didn't respond, because Boros was right. The longer you stared at the twisted, charred flesh, the more it seemed to shift, like something was still alive beneath it. Finally, the blacksmith shook his head. Doesn't matter, you did the job. He reached under the counter, pulled out the twin shadow fangs, and set them down with a heavy thunk. Twin shadow fangs, uncommon, forged from shadow-infused steel. Grants plus 5% bonus damage in darkness. Slightly reduces enemy perception of the user in low-light environments. Boros crossed his arms. You still owe me 225 gold, but I'll let you pay that off later. Ethan nodded. I'll get it to you soon. Boros grunted. Take care of those blades. You're gonna need 'em. A silent realization. As Ethan left the forge, he felt the weight of the daggers on his belt. They were better than his old weapon, sharper, faster, but they didn't make him invincible, not against whatever was coming. He glanced at the claw in his hand. Then, without a word, he tossed it into a nearby gutter. Some things weren't meant to be kept. Chapter 20. Gathering Shadows. The weight of knowledge. Ethan moved through the streets of Portland, the weight of his new daggers pressing against his belt. The encounter in the sewers had left him with more questions than answers. The shadow-touched, as he had begun calling them, weren't just dungeon creatures. They weren't like the Nightfangs or any monsters categorized by the system. They were something else, something that wasn't supposed to exist. And that terrified him, because if the system itself couldn't recognize them, then how the hell was he supposed to fight them? A city on edge. Despite the familiar bustle of the market, Ethan noticed something different. People were uneasy. Adventurers spoke in hushed tones, some glancing toward the guild hall with wary expressions. A merchant muttered to his assistant, "Another one gone." Another adventurer, a heavily armored warrior, shook his head. "They're not saying much, but the guild's looking into it. I'd stay close to the city if I were you." Ethan frowned. This wasn't normal. He stepped toward one of the murmuring adventurers. "What's happening?" The man turned, blinking in surprise before recognizing Ethan. "You're the one who went to the outpost, right?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. What's going on?" The adventurer's expression darkened. More disappearances. Ethan's stomach tightened. Returning to the guild. By the time Ethan reached the guild hall, the tension in the air was thick. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the noise around him as he headed straight for the reception desk. Elias Thurman was there, talking in low tones with another guild official. When Elias saw him, he barely hesitated before nodding. "Inside, now." Ethan followed him through the guild's restricted door, leading into a private office. Elias shut the door behind him. "You heard?" Ethan exhaled. "Disappearances." Elias nodded. 2 more last night. Both F-rank adventurers. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Same as before. Ethan gritted his teeth. The pattern was clear. Whatever was happening was spreading. A choice to make. Elias leaned against his desk, studying Ethan. "I know you're already heading back to the outpost with your team." Ethan nodded. "Good." Elias crossed his arms. "Because whatever you found last time, I think we're only seeing the beginning." A pause, then, "Do you want the guild's help?" Ethan blinked. "What?" Elias's expression was unreadable. "You're the only one who has fought one of these things and survived. I can send other adventurers to investigate. I can authorize better gear for you and your team. But if I do that..." His gaze hardened. "The guild takes full control of this mission. That means you report directly to me, and anything you find is classified." Ethan's jaw tightened. This was a calculated move. Elias wasn't offering help out of kindness. He wanted control. If Ethan accepted, he'd gain resources and information. But he'd lose his ability to act freely. He thought of his sister. Emma was taken when the system first descended, and no one had ever given him answers. Would the guild really help? Or would they bury the truth if it didn't fit their agenda? Ethan's fingers curled into a fist. "No." Elias raised an eyebrow. "No?" Ethan exhaled. "My team and I are handling this. If I find something, I'll decide what to do with it." For a long moment, Elias said nothing. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Good answer." A team reunited. Ethan left the guild office, his mind still processing everything. The moment he stepped into the main hall, a familiar voice called out. About time. Gareth, Kara, and Leah were waiting near their usual table. Kara was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, while Leah sipped from a cup of tea. Gareth eyed Ethan. "You're late." Ethan shrugged. "Had a conversation with Elias." Leah arched an eyebrow. "That can't have been fun." Ethan exhaled. "He offered to back us with guild support. I turned him down." Gareth gave a small nod, like he had expected it. "Good. That would have put us under their thumb." Kara snorted. "Yeah, I'm not looking to be a guild puppet." Leah hesitated. "Still, I can't help but wonder what they're not telling us." Ethan agreed, but they'd find out soon enough, because now they were going back. The journey to the outpost begins. The next morning, the party set out before dawn. This time they were better prepared. Gareth had upgraded his spear, reforging it with a stronger metal alloy. Kara had a fresh blade, newly sharpened and reinforced. Leah carried extra mana potions, ensuring she wouldn't run dry mid-battle. Ethan had his new daggers, the twin shadow fangs resting at his sides. The road stretched ahead of them, the faint glow of sunrise painting the horizon, and with every step, Ethan felt the shadows growing closer, waiting, watching. And this time, he was ready to face them.